Hello everybody, I'm Slice. In this series, we'll cover how to make an ATM star in all the mods 8. The options I cover may not be the only option, so I encourage you to find others and just have fun. Each part of this guide will have chapters down in the description, so you can return to specific parts when you need to. In this episode, we'll cover the basics and where to start. Let's begin by going over some resources that you'll want to get an early start on, as the ATM star requires a large amount of these. You'll need over 80,000 Certus quartz, 12,000 Certus dust, 59,000 diamonds, 530,000 emeralds, obsidian, soul sand, and endstone, over 4.78 million netherrack, 110,000 inferium essence, and 98,000 nether stars. Now, if you strictly go applied energistics 2, you'll need around 26,000 silicon. But if you strictly go refined storage, you'll need over 350,000 silicon. This is not an exhaustive list. You'll need a lot of other materials as well. Most of them will be covered by processes that we'll cover throughout this guide. First, we'll cover mystical agriculture. Mystical agriculture allows you to grow resources through farming and has a large variety of resource plants. In all the mods 8, there are 110 different seeds. To get started with mystical agriculture, you'll have to either mine for inferium ore, or killing mobs will have a chance to drop inferium essence. Once you have that, you can then think about making the infusion altar, which is 4 stone, a red wool, and 2 gold ingots. Then you'll need 8 infusion pedestals, which are 2 stone, 2 gold, and a red wool. Don't forget some form of redstone activation. With your infusion altar, just place it down, and it will indicate to you where your pedestals need to go. Once you have all 8 down, don't forget your redstone signal. In this case, I have a redstone torch underneath the altar. And what that'll do is it'll always allow for recipes to be crafted instead of waiting for a trigger to happen. But before you can do that, something else you'll have to look for is prosperity ore. Once you do that, you can find some prosperity shards. This is affected by fortune, so keep that in mind. With your prosperity shards, have 4 shards and a seed, a wheat seed, to get prosperity seed base. With your essence and an infusion crystal, this one is a master one. There is a novice one that you need to craft first. You can combine 4 essence of the low tier to the next tier. There are a lot of tiers in this mod for essence. The generic ones are 1 through 5. You have inferium essence, prudentium, tertium, imperium, and supremium. There is an add-on mod that allows you to include insanium as well as awakened supremium. There are other tiers as well. We have elemental tiers, which are for air, earth, water, fire, and elementium, which is an add-on from Botany. You then have magical, and magical is pretty late game. It's very expensive. It takes 4 insanium blocks, which is 9 insanium essence. So those are, if you will, tier 7 in my mind. Now, we won't be covering awakened supremium in this guide. That'll be a later part because you do need some of this, just not a ton of it. So with those in mind, these are some examples of some seeds that you may want to shoot for quickly, I would say. First and foremost is tier 1. There's not a whole lot in tier 1. You can craft all of these pretty easily. They are tier 1. You have inferium, stone, dirt, wood, ice, and deep slate. In my experience, I would concentrate specifically on inferium seeds to start off with, so that way you can start growing a lot of inferium essence. Additionally, you may want to consider making some ice seeds, so that way you have a nice way to make ice. In tier 2, we'll have, these are my 6 suggestions: nether seeds, silicon, nature, honey, dye, and mystical flower for Botania, if you're going Botania. If not, just avoid it. In tier 3, obsidian, redstone, Certus quartz, iron, nether quartz, and bronze. I used bronze in my Let's Play for making hammers before I learned about a specific trick that you can do. If you don't want to deal with bronze, you can switch this out for anything else. In tier 4, we have the end seeds, electrum, invar, gold, steel, and signalum. Signalum is just one of a few that I would recommend here. There's a lot of other stuff like lumium and I can't think of the other ones off the top of my head, but these are tier 4, so they're a little pricey. It would take Imperiums to get there. Tier 5, diamond seeds, emeralds, uraninite, inderium, wither skeleton, and netherite. All seeds, except for the inferium seed, have roughly the same crafting recipe. Inferium seeds, however, have a slightly different recipe. You'll need to combine 8 of them and a prosperity and a wheat seed. You'll need to combine 8 inferium essence and a wheat seed to make your first inferium seed. All other seeds will require you to use the infusion altar. So let's go ahead and craft ourselves some ice seeds, just so you can see what it's like. Okay, now this is essentially shapeless, if you will. The diagrams show that you have to have either the corners filled or the sides filled, but you can... Hello? Why did that happen? You can have all of them shapeless like this. Okay, so once I place this prosperity seed in here, since this has a redstone torch automatically there, it should start crafting the seed. And there we go. We have an ice seed. Okay. Same idea for all of these with their respective material and their tier of essence. Now that you've crafted your seeds, you'll need to find a way to grow them. One of the easiest ways to grow them early game is with hopper botany pots. Hopper botany pots require you to have found clay, so keep that in mind. Make sure you're gathering all the clay that you can, because it requires 5 terracotta, a flower pot, and a hopper. Now, the legit easiest way to do this is simply by using Farmland. You can actually harvest these by hand at first if you want. So let's go ahead and go over the different farmlands. We have Inferium farmland, Prudentium, Tertium, Imperium, Supremium, and Insanium. Now these do grow at different rates, with Insanium being the fastest at a 1.35 times multiplier. You can then add growth accelerators. They all have the same ones: Inferium, Prudentium, Tertium, Imperium, and Supremium. There is not an Insanium one. But with that, what you'll want to do is place these growth accelerators underneath a farmland. Okay, and what this will do is it will tick accelerate the growth of this plant. Additionally, the different farmlands have different outputs. Okay, so let's go ahead and place all these down so that way you can see the different varieties. With Inferium, the Inferium output is only 100%. Secondary chance, which would be seeds, would be 11%. That's not really that important, so don't be too concerned with that. Next up, you have the Prudentium farmland, which increases the Inferium output by 50%. And then the Tertium increases it by an additional 50, so a total of plus 100. Imperium does plus 150. Supremium does plus 200. And Insanium does plus 250%. Now that is just for Inferium, not all seeds. So notice here that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 growth accelerators. And this is on Insanium farmland. And it's not exactly growing all that fast. There are other ways to speed this up if you want, such as a lily pad of fertility. You can add up to 60 growth accelerators below a farmland. So you can have 12 Inferiums, 12 Prudentium, 12 Tertium, 12 Imperium, and 12 Supremium. Technically, you could have 60 Supremium growth accelerators, but there's absolutely no point in wasting all of that material to do that. And the reason for that is because technically, a Supremium and Inferium affect the growth the exact same. What this means, though, is that you can't have 13 Inferium or 60 Inferium. You can only have 12. You could have 24 Prudentium. You could have 36 Tertium. You could have 40 Imperium. But again, all these blocks have the same mechanic. They're just limited on quantity based on location of your seed. So now that this is fully grown, you could, right click it and get some essence. That to me is rather slow. So my preferred method for early game is to actually use hopper Botany Pots, as I mentioned before. So with Insanium farmland in here just for show, we can start growing these. Now what this will do is, since this is a hopper Botany Pot, it'll place all of the essence and seeds into a storage system. Okay, you can then have this storage system attached to a storage controller, for example, which you can then have a storage bus from maybe your applied energistics. I do believe there is something for that as well in refined storage, but you'll be able to see the contents of this within your ME system. Now, notice here that this is actually growing quite fast, comparatively speaking to that with some growth accelerators. It will only produce a small amount each time. But the really neat thing with these is you can technically time and bottle them. Now this is a little bit of a later game thing, so keep that in mind. But you can tick accelerate all the way up to 256. I mean, look how fast that's going. Oh yeah, there's also some fertilized essence in there too. Small chance to get that, but that's pretty useful when you get started on new seeds. You can use a bunch of this that has been gathered previously to spam a bunch of seeds early on. Now this time in a bottle will eventually go away, as you saw, so it's not permanent. But there are permanent ways to tick accelerate, such as the roots mod. I don't have that set up here to be able to show you, as I've actually personally never used it. I've seen other people use it and wanted to mention it, so it is quite useful. Now, for farmland, you can technically sort of automate this a little bit with a harvester pylon. Harvester pylons can change between 3x3 all the way up to 9x9s. I have just an Modium hoe in here because it's unbreakable, just to kind of show it. None of these have grown to the point where they'd be harvestable anyway. That's how slow this process is without any growth accelerators. Now, I highly recommend staying away from using 60 growth accelerators. I did that in my Let's Play for my 11x11 farm for a long time. And I didn't realize that it was actually causing a significant amount of lag in my world. I ended up switching all of this out for the next setup that I'm going to show you, which is Phytogentic Insolators. These things are very, very useful. Now, they are a tad bit more expensive than maybe early to mid game because of Lumium. But even that's not terribly expensive because you can find some glowstone, tin, and silver, and then combine it with a fire charge to make some. And your first craft of Lumium ingots, I highly recommend making yourself a seed. It is tier 4, so keep that in mind. It might take you a little bit to get there, but well worth it in the end, because if you go this route, you're going to need a lot of Lumium. Now, these things require energy as well as water. You can just craft a sink. It's infinite water. The other thing is energy. These things will require a fair amount of energy, so you'll have to have a decent energy setup before really diving into this. We'll cover energy a little bit later in this guide, but just know that these things are extremely fast. Now, for example, I went ahead and did a little bit of testing with some Nether Star seeds. This first one is only augmented by a cyclical processing. Now, the reason why you want this is because what it will do is it will allow you to keep your seed inside of here. If you don't have that, what will happen is this seed will actually go to the output and then be sucked into whatever system you have going. So this prevents that. It will allow the seed to be put back into the input slot. So notice the speed of this. I've been talking this entire time and it was only approximately halfway done. That will drastically improve. So once I go over the other two, I will explain to you the numbers that I tested on. If this machine doesn't operate fast enough, your system that can pull stuff out of these machines will actually pull the seed out. So that's why I highly recommend doing an upgrade to this. Just having an integral component in here, whether it be Invar, Electrum, or even Resonant, I recommend sticking with Resonant. You want this machine to operate far faster, okay? So let's go ahead and put some of these in here. Now, in this next one, I have this fully upgraded with a resonant integral component, a cyclical processing, and then 2 speeds. Look at how much faster this one is. Okay, now with these upgrades placed in, just to show you the comparison between all of these. With no upgrades, this will produce approximately 6 essence every 5 minutes. That's not great. With just a 4x scaling factor resonant integral component, it jumps up to 24 per 5 minutes. And then if you add in both of these amplifier speeds, you'll go all the way up to 59 or 60 essence every 5 minutes. And then you can actually tick accelerate these machines. Watch how fast this gets going. It's going so fast that it can't even keep up with the energy. So if I had better means to supply energy, this thing would be going extremely fast. Right now, it's bogged down so much that it's wasting its energy before it can produce, so it's actually not producing. So keep that in mind. Now, I've been using Nether Star seeds to show here. If you have Nether Star seeds in or on top of actual farmland, you actually need a Nether Star crux, which is actually rather expensive to make. Right? It requires 4 Insanium Essence, 2 Nether Stars, a block of diamond, and then 2 Withering Souls, which you get from killing the Wither. Which, I mean, you for the Nether Stars, you'd have to do that anyway. So keep that in mind, that if you were to do regular farmland, you're going to need to craft yourself a Nether Star crux for each one of these seeds that you want to do. You don't need that crux inside of a Phytogentic Insulator. I do believe you need them inside of those, though. Yeah. So if you grow it inside of a garden clouche, you would need the crux in there. You would need the crux inside of the hopper, but you don't need it in the Phytogentic Insulator. Additionally, if you have an endless amount of bone meal, for example, you can supply these Phytogentic Insulators with bone meal in this bottom slot. And every time this operation finishes, it will consume a bone meal to produce an additional resource. So you can really get this going. Now, you need a lot of Nether Stars. I mentioned before that it's roughly 98,000 stars for 1 ATM star. This particular method is extremely slow for gathering Nether Stars. And the reason for that is because of how expensive they are. Okay, when a Nether Star seed grows, it produces a Nether Star essence. And 9 of those produces 1 shard. You need 3 shards to make 1 star. I calculated it roughly, and that is going to result in you requiring roughly like 2.6 some odd million essence just to be able to produce that. There's a much faster way, though, and that's going to lead us into our next section. But I wanted to show you why you need all of those Nether Stars. Okay, in the ATM star, you have 15 3 times compressed Nether Star blocks. That's where the 98,000 comes from. There are some Nether Stars in various other recipes, but the majority of it, like 99.99% of the Nether Stars required, are in these 3 times compressed blocks. Next up, we have hostile neural networks. To get started, you'll want to make a handful of model frameworks. Those require 4 lapis lazuli, 2 redstone, a smooth stone, gold ingot, and a redstone repeater. I recommend starting with 6 or 8, maybe, to start off with. Our goal here is to get some data on Wither. Once you have those made, you're going to want to make yourself at least a deep learner or 2. I personally did 2 in my Let's Play, so that way I could have 8 off the bat. These require 4 obsidian, 3 redstone repeaters, a glass pane, and a redstone dust. Now, what you do with these is you take the model framework and you right-click on a mob to set the data model. You then put the frameworks inside of your deep learner. Okay, these have 4 slots. So let's jump over to my Let's Play series so that way I can show you how to obtain Wither data models. I've loaded up my Let's Play series so that way I can show you what to do with doing the data models and the Withers. First, you cannot do it while he's in this mode. Oh, you can. You can do this while he's spawning. Now, you want to place all of these inside of a deep learner. Now, my system ended up killing him, but that's fine. We now have 4 data modules in the top left there with your deep learner equipped. You can see that you have 6 remaining. See? Now you will get a bunch of drops. This may not be as easy for you as it is for me currently, because I'm currently near the end of this playthrough. Now with 1 remaining, let's check out to see what happens when I kill the 6th. Okay, you can see that it is now a basic model, and it requires 12 additional kills to get to the next tier. As I mentioned before, you don't need to do those killings yourself. You can allow your setup to do that for you. Once you have your data models above the faulty tier, you'll want to make sure that they're at least basic tier. You'll want to start crafting the other necessary items for this setup. First, you're going to want to make sure that you have a automatic crafting setup for prediction matrices. These require 4 glass panes, a gold ingot, a lapis lazuli, and an iron ingot. You're going to be going through a lot of these, so make sure you have some sort of automation for it. Next up, we have the simulation chambers. I recommend having more simulation chambers than loot fabricators. In my experience, you go maybe like 9 to 1, maybe even more. I haven't done a full-on test, but a 1-to-1 just isn't good enough for loot fabricators. In order to craft a simulation chamber, you'll want 2 lapis lazuli, a redstone comparator, 2 ender pearls, an obsidian, and a glass pane. To make the loot fabricators, you'll want 2 gold ingots, a redstone comparator, an obsidian, 2 diamonds, and a netherite ingot. With everything crafted and your data models obtained, it's now time to actually get the loot that you're looking for. So first things first, make sure that you have a stockpile of prediction matrices so that way you can fill up your simulation chamber. The simulation chamber and the loot fabricator will require some power, so make sure to hook that up. I'm not going to start mine yet just because I'm going to explain first. With your data model, place it inside of the simulation chamber in the top left here. You'll start filling prediction matrices in this top left corner of these 3. A few things to note here. First is this main section here. This will indicate to you if something is wrong or if it's producing. Okay, in this case, it says that it doesn't have any energy. If I take it out, take out the data model, it will say, please insert a data model to begin simulation. You cannot put in a faulty data model. It has to be basic or self-aware or anywhere in between. Basic tier only gives you a 5% accuracy, meaning that when this triggers, it's only going to have a small chance to actually produce something useful. But every time this triggers, what this is doing is it's also, quote unquote, killing a wither, meaning it's actually improving the accuracy over time of your data model. So you don't have to kill all of these withers or any other mob for that matter manually. Okay, so just get to basic and then let this do its job. It will get to self-aware, which is, I believe, 95% accuracy over time. It might take a little while to get there, but if you just leave it alone, it will get there. Okay, so once you're actually producing, what's going to happen for the wither one specifically is you'll end up getting a wither skeleton prediction as well as a generalized ender prediction. The generalized ender prediction is used in a few different crafting recipes, most notably the dragon head. So you don't have to go all the way to the end to get additional dragon heads. You can actually craft them if you want. There's other ways to get dragon heads as well. Just keep that in mind. Additionally, and most importantly, you get this wither skeleton prediction. This is also used to craft wither ribs. Not that important. Trust me, you'll get too many of these if you have a mob farm. Don't worry about it. Next up, we have the wither prediction. These are used in the loot fabricator to grant you Nether Stars. It is a 1-to-1. So one wither prediction will grant you 1 Nether Star. And if you have like 18 of these at self-aware level, you're producing a lot of Nether Stars rather quickly. And you now start to see how the hostile neural networks is the preferred method over mystical agriculture, specifically for Nether Stars. You can produce a lot of these pretty quickly. All right, so let's go ahead and give this power just that way you can actually see this in action. Notice that these are taking a fair amount of energy between them. Okay, it's a little pricey. All right, so now you can see that sequence failed, and that happened because the model accuracy is low. You can see that the model accuracy over time is increasing. And every time this gets to 100, it starts an entire new sequence. Processing results. It failed again. When it fails, you get a generalized ender prediction. And it increases your model accuracy. See, I've done it now 3 times and I haven't gotten a single prediction, a wither prediction. But this is now 1% higher than it was before. Okay, same thing. These things can also be tick accelerated if you want. I didn't personally do it. I just increased the number of simulation chambers. The ones that I actually used in this tutorial, I plan on adding machines for just to get some additional Nether Stars. But with these predictions in hand, you need to process them inside of a loot fabricator. See, once you do this, it gives you an option of what to select, because some of these predictions actually have multiple selections. And once you've set it, you can kind of just leave it. You don't have to keep coming in here and selecting it. Okay, so now that I have more, you can see that it's already pre-selected. This is setting the recipe for the loot fabricator. Next up, we have Apotheosis spawners. I'm going to start with a word of caution. Apotheosis spawners that are maxed out will be able to produce a lot of enemies very quickly. If you've applied all modifiers to a spawner, chances are you're going to produce so many enemies that you're going to start producing lag, which means you need a very quick way to handle those enemies. Additionally, once those enemies are killed, you need a very efficient way to handle all of the loot that gets dropped. Now, depending on how you handle that, your loot may drop differently. I will show you in this guide how I went about it in my Let's Play, and it produces a lot of items that get thrown into the world that I happen to manage very quickly. To get started, we want to make a swap, a mob swap. To do that, you just take wool, 2 wool, and a stick. Once you have a mob swap, and mob swabs do not work on every mob in the game, so keep that in mind when you go and do this. Okay, I now have an evoker that is spawned in. I created it just for this purpose. What you want to do is you want to take this and sneak right click on the mob. With that swab now, you want to combine it with a wheat seed and a fluid XP bucket. That will grant you a GM chicken feed. With a GM chicken feed, you want to find a chicken out in the wild. Or maybe you can produce one in a farm that you have. But either way, you need to feed this chicken this feed that you just made. Boom. And now that will give you a spawn egg of the mob that you swapped. Keep in mind, you cannot do this with every mob. Okay, there are other methods. You can use a mob imprisonment tool to capture some mobs, and then you can use industrial foregoing to make a mob duplicator if you want. I did not do that in my Let's Play because for me it was a little bit slower than these Apotheosis spawners. Now I've spawned in a pig spawner here just so that way I can show you what to do. Take the spawn egg that you got from an evoker, and I'll explain why an evoker in a minute, and apply the spawn egg to the spawner. We now have an evoker spawner. This particular spawner is kind of pitiful. It is kind of pitiful. It has a min spawn delay of 200 ticks and a max spawn delay of 800 ticks. Only a spawn count of 4 with a max entity of 6. Meaning it can spawn once and you have to kill 2 in order to even have a chance at spawning. Or they need to go outside of the range of the spawner. Activation range is 16, meaning you have to be within 16 blocks of the spawner. And then the spawn range for this is only 4 blocks, meaning it can only spawn within a 4-block radius around it. Okay. Now there are modifiers for these spawners, and they do get a little pricey on some of this material. First up, we have a Nether Star. This tells the spawner to ignore players. And by that, I mean, you don't have to worry about the activation range. You don't have to be within 16 blocks. This will keep on producing if you're not around, if you don't have redstone control set up. I have redstone on this one because I didn't want it producing anything while I'm here. Next up is the Soul Lantern. It ignores light. In Minecraft, mobs have a restriction based on light, whether or not they can spawn. This tells the spawner to ignore that and allows them to spawn at any light level. Fermented Spider Eyes. This adds +1 count to the spawn count. So instead of having 4, you can increase that. There is a max, and we'll show you that in a moment. Next up is the Gas Tier. This allows for +2 max entities. So if you get this spawning fast enough, you can tell the spawner to ignore how many entities are around it a little bit better. Next is a Wool. This makes the spawner spawn enemies that are silent. So slime, for example, won't produce the slimy noises. Witches won't produce the witchy noises. Skeletons won't creak. Zombies won't moan. So on and so forth. Chorus Fruit. No AI. This means that, like this evoker, it'll do nothing. If this was not applied, this evoker would be spawning its little minions and causing all sorts of mayhem. Sugar. This decreases the min spawn delay by 10 ticks. Prismarine Crystals. This increases the activation range. Redstone Comparators implement redstone control, meaning you can flip a switch or toggle it some other way to control whether or not the spawner is on or off. Clocks. This decreases the max spawn delay. Typically speaking, you will find most spawners have 800 spawn delay. So it takes well over a stack of clocks to get below what you would want. You can get the min spawn delay and the max spawn delay down to 20 ticks, meaning 1 second. Next up is the Dragon Egg. Dragon Egg ignores all conditions. In my experience, though, I still applied the rest of these because I'm assuming that maybe there's a bug, not confirmed, but with just the dragon egg, enemies for me were not spawning. So I still used Soul Lantern. I still used Nether Star. And anything else that modifies the mobs themselves or allows them to spawn. Blaze rods. This increases the spawn range. Now, this is not something that I think is necessary because for mob farms, you really want them to be a little bit condensed. And we'll go over that in a little bit. Now, if you want to better fine-tune your spawner, all of these items increase effectiveness of your spawner. If you accidentally go a little bit too far or you want to better fine-tune it, all you have to do is have some nether quartz and place it in your offhand, and then have these items in your main hand when you apply them. It'll reverse the effect. Now, my preferred method on killing mobs is the mob masher. Mob mashers require 3 diamonds, a block of iron, a block of redstone, 2 iron spikes, and 2 iron swords. The mob masher can have augments applied to them in their inventory. 2 of those augments are upgrade sharpness and upgrade looting. Upgrade sharpness requires 4 iron swords, 4 gold nuggets, and a redstone dust. The mob masher can only hold 10 of these. Same thing with the upgrade looting. You can only hold 10. Upgrade looting requires 4 blue dye, 4 gold nuggets, and a redstone dust. Now for an example as to why you would want an evoker for this setup. You can do this with a lot of different mobs. In my Let's Play, I have slime, witches, zombies, ghast, blazes, endermen. The list goes on. I have approximately, I believe, like 16 different mobs. The 2 most important ones, at least for the materials that we're talking about in this guide, I think are Evoker and Cave Creepers. Cave Creepers are a little bit harder to come by, but they have a small chance to spawn emeralds and diamonds, which you need a lot of. It's not a lot of emeralds, it's not a lot of diamonds, but additional drops is a good thing to speed up your production. Now, the other thing that an evoker happens to drop is a Totem of Undying. Totem of Undying is actually also required in the ATM star. So the evoker literally only drops useful stuff. Now, it will drop a lot of Totem of Undying, and you don't need a ton of it, but you do need some. So in here, I do have a spawner that is maxed out. Aside from the spawn range. As I mentioned before, I don't need to do that. It's almost maxed out. I don't have the spawn count maxed out. Let's actually do that. So that way you can see how ridiculous this is. Okay. So now that's maxed out. Okay. I have these fans here, so that way it pushes them into the mob masher. Each fan currently for this setup has 3 width modifiers, making it push all the way to the mob masher on every side. So with that, let's go ahead and initiate. So notice these guys have nothing going on. Do you see how much they're dropping? Might be a little hard to notice right away. With this type of evoker spawner setup, I have 20 of these maxed out in my Let's Play. With this kind of setup, notice that the items are getting rather laggy. Let's actually go ahead and turn this off so that way I can explain. Okay, so this is a prime example of what can happen with your mob farm if things get too crazy. Okay. All of these items were backed up in this particular absorption hopper. There is another item that I particularly use in my setup. This advanced item collector. This collects items and places into inventories far faster than an absorption hopper. The advanced item collector doesn't have its own inventory. It literally takes items and places it in an inventory. This has its own inventory and then hoppers into one of the 6 sides, depending on which way you have it facing. This also collects experience from the mobs, so that's extremely useful. So I also have that. It's just I don't worry about the items going into this absorption hopper because the item collector does it far more efficient. With this particular setup, I'm able to get an entire emerald block, 5x, mind you, in approximately 67 minutes of AFK around this farm. Now, if you know my Let's Play, I have that particular farm pretty far away from my base, so that way it's not constantly running. I just go over there every once in a while and let it AFK. Next up, we're going to cover lasers from industrial foregoing. A laser drill requires 2 gold gears, a redstone, 2 pistons, a simple machine frame, a diamond gear, and 2 plastic. To go along with the laser drill, you need an ore laser base. This is what you'll be pointing all of the laser drills towards. Additionally, you can make yourself a fluid laser base. I'll touch on that in a little bit. More importantly, the ore laser base requires 2 vibranium gears, a redstone dust, 2 ore of any kind, I have iron here, an advanced machine frame, plastic, 2 plastic, and an all the Modium pickaxe. So far, we have not talked about how to get all the Modium or vibranium. That will be covered in a later section. This is a little bit of a later game option, but it's a very good option for getting additional material. I personally use these to gain a lot of diamonds. Once you have those 2 crafted, you'll want to craft yourself a lens. A lens requires a little bit of latex, 4 glass panes, and a die. Each lens requires its own die. So the 2 that you would want for emeralds and diamonds are a light blue and a lime. Now, with these, what you want to do is in the ore laser base, you would want to put these. Now, these can hold up to 6. See? Now, I personally think these lasers should only be used for materials that you're not getting out of a farm of some sort. Because the evoker setup, for example, produces way more emeralds than you'll ever need. So for this, I have 3 large setups strictly for diamonds. And I'll get into it in a moment as to what I mean by a large setup. For now, all you have to worry about is your lenses are placed inside of your ore laser base. Additionally, you want to make sure that the depth of your laser base is set up correctly. So if you take a look at diamond ore and how to produce it, you can come over here to the laser drill items. and see what the requirements are for diamond ore. First up, you have light blue laser lens, which is what we have. And you have a min Y of level 5 and a max Y level 16 with a weight of 4. Don't worry about the weight too much. Just know that you need light blue, 4 diamonds. You need it to be between Y level 5 and Y level 16. Additionally, there are biome requirements. For diamond, there are no actual requirements. It goes to any. However, for the fluid base, and the reason why I use that is because I have a setup that generates me lava. And that is required to be in the nether. Now, with your ore laser base setup, you need to supply these power. With your lenses set up in the ore base, you have to make sure that your laser drills are pointing towards your ore laser base. Now these can be in a 3x3 pattern. And then it can go 2 deep on every single side. Okay, so you have 6 sides, and you can place 18 of these laser drills on each side. That's a fair amount of laser drills. All of these laser drills need power, and they're a little bit hungry, so be careful. They're not too terribly expensive. As you can see here, I have 3 of these touched up. So let's go ahead and transfer energy in here. Notice that they only hold 10,000 each. You can technically increase various portions of this laser drill, probably the range, meaning you might be able to actually place more. I personally didn't. I just have the 18 on each side 3 times. Now, you can see here that this is actually starting to progress. The more laser drills you have, the faster this will be. Now this is a rather janky setup, but I just wanted to show you how fast this can actually get going. Noticeable increase, and that was just off of, let's see, 16 additional laser drills. Now imagine that on all 6 sides. This can actually start producing rather quickly. It will produce diamond ore, which means you then have to further process this diamond ore. So you can choose your matter of production there. Our next section will be productive bees. To get started in productive bees, you'll have to craft yourself some nests. Now, how do you know which nest do you actually want? Well, if you come into the quest log and go down to productive bees, you'll be able to see a large variety of nests. Okay, in this section down here, you'll see some starting nests. You can also go into JEI if you already happen to know like what you're aiming for. Let's go with, let's say a lumber bee, right? If you want a lumber bee to be able to get some wood, you'd come in here, and if you left click, you can see that there's some information on them. Notice that some bees, like this one, cannot breed amongst themselves, meaning you can't breed a lumber bee with a lumber bee to get another lumber bee. This comes into play pretty significantly in a little bit. Now, in order to breed a lumber bee, you need to combine a green carpenter bee and a yellow carpenter bee to get it. That's a pretty generic thing throughout all of the bees, so keep that in mind. A lumber bee, like I said, comes from green carpenter and yellow carpenter. But where do these guys come from? Well, these guys, if you left click on them, they're solitary and can be found living alone in nests around the overworld. Look up recipe for this bee to see which nest it can spawn in. Now, you would initially think, okay, let me left click on this to get the recipe of it. No, you actually want to press U by default, or I believe actually right click also does it. Okay, to bring in the bee uses. That will allow you to see the various uses for this bee. And most importantly, the bee spawning tab is here. This bee can be obtained, the green and yellow can both be obtained from jungle nests, birch nests, dark oak, or oak nests. So since the dark oak can also do blue banded bees, and the jungle nest can do blue banded bees, I'd say stick away from those and stick with a birch or oak. In this case, I happen to have jungle in the recipe book, but all it is a wooden sword with the material of the nest, and it makes a nest. Okay, so over here we have a jungle nest, a reed nest, and a sand nest, just for example. Do note that if you make your own reed nests, these do need to have water nearby, just like a sugarcane would. Okay, with these nests now placed in the world, you can right click on a nest, which will make the bees want to come to this nest. Now, notice that in the one probe up there, it's saying repopulation, cool down, use additional treats to speed up. This initially starts off at 1200 ticks, or 1200 seconds, actually, which is fairly long. You can just do this and leave them, and it will eventually do it. Or you can apply additional hunter treats to chunk it down. Now, this does it by a percentage, so when you get lower, it's actually going to do less time per honey tree. So if you happen to have like something like a time in a bottle or the wand from Roots, you can tick accelerate these if you want once you get to a certain point. I tend to go down to like 300 myself and then just use some time in the bottle. But yeah, you can do that to multiple and you can spam it. The amount of honey treats that you're going to go through for this type of process is pretty significant. Earlier in this guide, I mentioned making some honey treat seeds, or sorry, honey seeds, which allow you to craft these honey treats pretty easily. Not directly, because you need to craft the honeycombs, and you also need to craft the honey blocks. Now, in order to get that, you need honey bottles, right, which you can do with honey essence and glass bottles. You can auto craft that, which is what I've done. So that way when I need it, I can just, ask my system to make it. You will want quite a few of these. You can also produce this honey treat by doing a bottling system, which I've also done just because I have so many bees going. I have an endless amount of honey and I can easily produce honeycombs. So I have honey treats on demand and there's a lot of them. Okay, so some bees that you'll maybe want to look for. Now, disregard these particular spawn eggs. These are, I just cheated these in, for example. Ooh, real quick. See, an ashy mining bee spawned out of this sand nest. That's actually a very useful bee for you. So keep that in mind. You will want ashy mining bees. The effect that you're seeing now is a radioactive effect, and we'll cover that in a little bit. So in order to get these spawn eggs, you'd have to do some crafting, but for now, I'm just using them for examples. So diamond bees are going to be rather useful. In order to get one, you need to breed a lapis bee and an ender bee using a flower. Not all breeding requires flowers. Now, I do have an example over here of a reed bee and a nomad bee. Nomad bees, you're going to want quite a bit of, so make sure to check those out. Yeah, these guys come from the same nest that ashy mining bees are in. So the way that works is if an ashy mining bee is inside of a nest, so like this guy over here, if he would come over here and get inside this nest, there's going to be a cooldown that happens. At the end of that cooldown, nomad bees have a chance to spawn when this guy pops out. Okay, so it's a little bit of a lengthy process because it relies on these guys doing their business and then wanting to come out of their nest. So make sure you get that started sooner rather than later, because you'll want quite a few nomad bees. So this breed is actually going to be a useful combination for you. Okay, so you feed them, they do the hearts, and now we have, oh, little bee, so hard to see. You can feed flowers to the bees to make them grow up, but this guy is a silicon bee. Okay, so now that's going to take him a moment. I can't seem to feed him any more flowers. Okay, he'll grow up, and you can capture these guys with your bee cages. I'll go over those in a second. Where did it go? Bam. Okay, so now I have a sturdy bee cage with a silicon bee in it. If you hold down shift, hold shift for more info, you can see that this bee has different stats. The type hive, productivity, normal, weather tolerance, none, behavior, diurnal, endurance, medium, temper, normal, and breeding items is any flower. The most important part here is probably the productivity and temper. The reason why productivity is important is because that is the stat that allows the bee to produce more honeycombs of a particular type. And temper, if you have these bees just flying around like this, you want to make sure that they're not hostile or angry, because they will actually attack you if you annoy them too much. So with that in mind, you'd want to craft yourselves some diamond bees and maybe some emerald bees. We can also do silicon bees, which is what I just showed you. Now, you know what? I'm going to hold off on that one real quick. And the spatial bees. These guys are going to be pretty important for you as well. Okay, there's a lot of bees that are going to be very useful. If you've seen my Let's Play, you've seen how many bees I have. I have 80 diamonds to start and 80 emeralds to start. And that's just 2 types of bees. Okay. Now, how did I get there? Well, it's a lot of production, but you can get started and going pretty quickly because this stuff is rather inexpensive. Okay, so in order to really start off with breeding bees, it'll be the method of using the breeding item. In this case, it was a flower. And manually doing it, which I still do for some bees, and you will have to do for some bees. But this breeding chamber is where you can also do this. So let's go ahead and grab these guys. Grab that one, pick those up. And what we can do is actually put these guys in here. Now, once you do that, in this section right here, you will notice that a silicon bee pops up. This indicates to you that what's going to be produced from this combination is a silicon bee. There are some bees, some bee combinations that have multiple outputs, and these buttons right here are intended to allow you to switch between them. However, as you can see, this doesn't work quite yet. So that's been like this for the entirety of all the mods 8 so far. I don't know if that'll be fixed, but if it does, keep in mind that these buttons allow you to change which output comes out of this breed. If you have a setup where you actually need a different bee out of like a combination of 2, just keep picking these up and dropping them in there until you get the output that you want. Now, with them in there, you do still have to provide the correct material for them to actually breed. Additionally, you'll want to make sure that you have a lot of bee cages. Now with all of that, they will start breeding. Notice how slow this is. This little bar right here would indicate which what the progress is. Look at how slow this is. This can be tick accelerated as well. I use time in a bottle on this a lot. So keep that in mind that you may want to find a way to tick accelerate this. Additionally, there are bee upgrades. We'll get to another part of that soon. You can do speed upgrades, productivity upgrades, bee upgrades, and simulator upgrades. There are a few other upgrades, but those 4 are the ones that I'm going to cover as they are, to me, the most useful in this entire setup. Now, the bee upgrade, what you can do with those is that you can apply them to a hive, and every time a bee goes to produce, they have a chance to spawn a baby. Now, they only have that chance to spawn the baby if they themselves can breed. So something like... Man, that effect is annoying. Something like, for example, the ATM star bee. Those can't breed. So the baby upgrade won't work with them. But if you were to have these, maybe the reed bees can. I don't know the entire list of which ones are allowed to use and which ones can't. But each upgrade here has a chance, a 5% chance. And these do stack. So you can have 4 in there. So you have a 20% chance every time a bee produces to make a baby. Now, it will throw the baby out into the world, so you'll want to make sure that your entire setup is cleaned up nicely, secure, if you will. I'll show you that in a second. Now, with these guys, once they actually produce, you'll get a child bee inside of a bee cage. You know what? I'm going to time and bottle this real quick. So that way we can show you. Okay, so now we have a child bee. With that child, you'll want to put in the bee cage, and this is where you're going to want some more treats, because you need treats in order to make it grow. You can also give in speed upgrades here as well, if you wanted. See how slow this is, though? You can also speed this up. So once this completes, you will then be granted an adult version of the bee that you put in, and you can then use that bee. Okay. So with those in mind, where did you guys go? Come here. Yeah. They're a little bit hard to get sometimes, so have fun with that. All right, so I mentioned that you want to keep your bees a little bit contained because they can and will kind of fly off and perhaps not return to where they were. With your bees in hand, you can go to a hive that you've created. Now, there are just regular beehives. Okay, so you can make regular beehives or advanced beehives. The advanced beehives are a little annoying to craft, in my opinion, but they take shears, a campfire, some oak planks, a vanilla beehive, and then some honeycombs. Another reason why having the mystical agriculture honey seeds is important, because you'll want to craft quite a few of these to get started. If you see my playthrough, I created quite a few. Now, additionally, on top of the beehive, a beehive actually only has 3 slots for bees. But if you make I always get this one wrong. There we go. If you make the expansion box, you can see that I have both of them here. This actually grants you 5 slots. Okay. I highly recommend doing it. It's rather inexpensive. It's just a little tedious to craft. Oh, those radioactive bees. So with these guys and a sturdy bee cage, what you want to do is right click on the hive, and that sets their home. They know that this is their hive. And 4. So now we have a full nest worth of silicon bees. Something that you'll need to pay attention to is what flower does a bee need in order to produce. Okay, so you can figure that out by going to the bee flowering tab once you press U or right click on a bee in JEI. So in here, you can see that the silicon bee requires a few different options. Okay, lavender quartz, red quartz, elven quartz, sunny quartz, quartz ore, blue nether quartz ore, or quartz pillar. So basically, all you need is something in that setup to allow them to flower. Now, in this case, you can just place, and they should want to go to it. You see how they're kind of hovering? Right? Now they're going to flower, and they're going to, once they're done here, they'll go into the expansion box, or the beehive rather. Now, if you don't want these blocks just chilling out here in the world, see, now they're going in. Okay, and once they come back out, they'll produce honeycombs. I don't personally like having those blocks out, so instead I make feeding slabs. Now, this has 3 slots. As of ATM 8 version 1.0.13, production bees is actually bugged a little bit, where the feeding slab will only allow the 3rd slot to work. I don't know if that's fixed in the newer versions. I just corrected my setup and just kind of left it. And I have not checked back. So keep in mind, if yours isn't working, maybe try only having the 3rd slot with an item. Something else to note. This needs to be at ground level. Okay, doing it here or doing it here or doing it here won't work. This expansion box, this hive, needs to be able to see this right here. Now, at the moment, that doesn't matter, because the bees will spawn into the world and they will concentrate themselves onto this. In which case, you can technically have it wherever you want, as long as it's within distance of this beehive. Where this comes into play is when you use the simulator upgrade. The simulator upgrade is something that I highly recommend getting into. And the reason for that is because once you get into bees excessively, like I did in my playthrough, you will come across a scenario. Actually, I'm just going to do productions. You will come across a scenario where you start having lag problems, because you start talking about like 5 silicons, 5 redstone, 5 lapis, 5 this, 5 that, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. They start adding up a lot. Okay, my particular bee area, I had, I believe, 12 different buildings of similar size to this. It was a 3x3 interior. Okay, and each one of those had 2 hives in them. Now, not every single one of them is filled with 5 bees, because I haven't filled it out quite yet. But I mentioned that my diamond bees and my emerald bees, I have 80 of. 80 bees each. Okay, that's 160 bees just between those 2. And then add in all of these guys. Them popping in and out of the nest, as well as just being entities existing in the world, causes a lot of lag. Okay, the simulator upgrade here no longer allows them to leave the hive. Instead, it simulates a trip to and from, or a trip to its flower and coming back and then leaving to go back to the flower. The leaving is important because that's when the items are produced. Okay, so once these guys actually get through their entire process, what will happen is they'll produce a little bit of honey. So if you have glass bottles in here, you can gather some honey. You can automate pulling that out and putting in new glass bottles, but it'll drop off into this little area here, the honeycombs that it produces, as well as the honey bottles. So keep all of that in mind when you're going into producing your bees. Is how do you want to pull your items out, and how do you want to push items into other aspects? Because with all those honeycombs, you have to find a way to process them. There are different ways to do that with centrifuges. Okay, there are different tiers of centrifuges within productive bee. You have the regular centrifuge, the powered centrifuge, and then the heated centrifuge. The heated centrifuge is kind of like the top tier, and they're not really expensive. No, the most expensive part is the upgrade block, I think, because you can actually get, actually no, the most expensive part is the inactive dragon egg, which requires you to have draconic chunks from productive bees, which comes from draconic bees. So you'll have to get those started. So before heated centrifuges, there are the powered ones, which are rather cheap. Okay. They basically do the same thing. It's just heated centrifuge does it better. Okay. With honeycombs, do you guys produce any yet? No. Okay. So now with the honeycombs, you'll want to place them inside of a centrifuge or a heated centrifuge or something, and it'll start producing some material for you. Now, in this case, silicon combs, they have a small chance to produce the actual item. Okay, in this case, it's a 50% chance. There are some that are even smaller. For example, really far down the road, what is it, Star Bee? Yeah, this guy, Starry Bee. This guy produces starry combs, which is shards for the ATM star. This is only a 5% chance. Now, additionally, it also gives you a 50% chance to create Nether Stars seeds, but at this point, it's kind of like, don't really need those that much. But a 5% chance to craft an ATM star shard. It's going to take a long time to get to these guys, and I will cover that in a moment. But notice that I put in a full stack of silicon combs, and this is barely produced. It's now just produced 20. This should roughly produce 32 because it's half of a stack and it's 50%. But that's not exactly how all of that works. Okay, so these things will start producing a bunch of wax and the item as well as honey. If this fills up with any particular material, it won't produce. So you will have to manage the liquid portion of these centrifuges. Different bees produce different liquids. Like, for example, the ender bee produces a different liquid here. If you leave the liquid from the ender bee in here, something like the silicon combs won't produce in this centrifuge. You want to ensure that you've taken care of the liquid in there. Okay. Now these guys can also have upgrades. I believe in mine, I have 3 production and 1 speed. Or no, I think it's 1 production and 3 speed. Because with the amount of bees that I have, I get going on production super quick. And I get backlogged on honeycombs ridiculously fast. So I have to have these producing very fast. You could go the route of having more centrifuges and then just having production upgrades rather than speed upgrades. But it produces so fast that I don't worry about it. Now, for the final part of this B section is going to lead us into something that's going to be extremely useful later on. Okay. Now, these guys right here are radioactive bees. Radioactive bees are what's been giving me that nausea effect. These guys are a little bit nasty. Okay, you get those by breeding iron bees and Cree bees. Okay, you can look up how to get those. They're pretty easy. Just by feeding them a flower, you can combine them into radioactive bees. Radioactive bees produce radioactive combs, which aren't as useful. Right? They produce you some uranium. That's not that important. Their use really comes into wasted bees, wasted radioactive bees. Now, I'm not going to show all of the details of this right now because I will be covering that at a later part of the series. But these guys are obtained by basically killing off radioactive bees with radiation. It's a very small chance for these guys to spawn. These guys do not require a feeding slab of any kind because their feed, if you will, is radiation in the atmosphere. They will consume any amount of radiation that's in the atmosphere to be able to produce wasted radioactive combs. First up, we are looking for all the Modium ore. Now, if you don't already know where that is, it's going to be in the deep dark, usually on cave walls. And the easiest way to find that is using nature's compass. So let's go into a real world example of how to find one. As you can see, my compass is actually pointing off to this direction because I have one that's like really small, like right here. But this one over here is actually underneath a mountain biome. Now, if you've never experienced the deep dark, they always spawn deep underground underneath mountainous biomes. Okay, so once you actually get here with your compass, and you may or may not have flight, but you'll start seeing it spin. Okay, that means that you're on top of it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to dig down. But what we're looking for is going to be all the Modium ore. Now, when you first come down here, you're not going to have access to all the Modium site, so I don't recommend paying attention to that at the moment. What I do recommend is switching over to having shaders on. The reason I recommend that is because you can have a setting where some of these will glow. So kind of like this, and my game is a little bit laggy right now. Sorry about that. They glow, right? And all the Modium ore glows pretty significantly. Okay, so sometimes you'll come across gold veins that shine a lot, but other times you'll come across all the Modium slate ore. Okay, now you're going to want a netherite pick for this, as mentioned, but you harvest it. Okay, and if you have Silk Touch, you'll be able to get the actual ore. Something to keep in mind while you're looking for all the Modium is that you are required to have at least netherite level mining. Notice here that a diamond pickaxe cannot mine it, but a netherite can. Okay, now there is modifiers on Apotheosis that might indicate to you that it's netherite mining levels. In my experience, I was not able to have that modifier actually work for gathering all the Modium. So just be cautious and make yourself a netherite pickaxe. I do believe Supremium pickaxes might also do that, but that might be a little bit beyond where you're at when you have the ability to get netherite. So with your first piece, if you have Silk Touch, you can use all the Modium ore inside of an enrichment chamber to get 2 pieces of dust. Or if you don't have Silk Touch, you can obtain these raw ore and use hammers to get 2 pieces. With that, all you have to do is bake them, smelt them into ingots, and once you have your first ingot, you'll unlock in the quest line additional ore as well as additional raw ore. So you'll get plenty of material. So let's go ahead and collect this, that way you can see how much. And in this case, you'll get 1 to 3. So keep that in mind. It might be random. So I got 1 ore and then 2 raw ore. So that'll be roughly, what, 2, 4, 6 ingots worth. Okay. So you can almost instantly get at least like 7 or 8 Modium ingots on your first go. Okay, so you don't have to spend a lot of time in the deep dark. Now with that, you're going to want to at least make 1 batch of nuggets, because having 9 nuggets will allow you to craft a fair amount of stuff. But most importantly, it'll allow you to craft the teleport pad. Teleport pad opens up the mining dimension. Or if you place it in the nether, it allows you to go to the other. We'll cover that in a much later part of the series, but the mining dimension is coming up soon. If you're looking to get into additional Modium while you're in the deep dark, after you've obtained your first piece, you can make a charm which allows you to see the ore. So notice that it highlights the ore. So the way you go about doing that is you have to make all the Modium powder by using a mortar, ender powder, a pestle, and 1 of your ingots. Okay, that'll only give you 1 piece. Okay, with that 1 piece, you can cook it or smelt it into a calcinated Modium powder, which then you use in a brewing setup with mundane potions to get all the Modium sight. Now these sights, they can be used individually. Okay, so notice up there that I have a buff. You would see that in your survival as well. Now something to keep in mind with that is you don't actually want to do that, because you want all 3 of them to be used in the crafting recipe of the charm, which is actually really easy because you get 3 potions for 1 calcinated. So ultimately, all you need is additional blaze powder to make yourself a charm of all the Modium sight. Now, there's a lot of different ores that have this same sight, so if you feel keen, you can make those as well. Once you have your very, very first setup going in the mining dimension, I highly recommend making yourself a builder. These require all the Modium nuggets, which is why you need all the Modium first before you can even make this. Otherwise, it's actually really cheap. So with that, there's a lot of different shape cards. I highly recommend a clearing card, and we'll get to that in a moment as to why. It's up to you whether or not you want to do fortune or silk. Me personally, I went with just a clearing because the mining dimension is endless and there's just so many materials that you won't really have too much of an issue. I recommend staying away from these other ones because they actually place dirt, which is going to be a problem for what you'll see in a moment. Okay, so how do we actually use these? First of all, you have to have your builder down with some power, okay? It needs power to be able to run. It is a little bit of an energy hog, so make sure you have a decent amount of power. And we'll get to power later on down the road, so that way you have different options on what to start with. You also need a lever to be able to turn it on or off, okay? So step one is take your clearing card, sneak, right-click, so that way on the bottom there you see now select the first corner. Okay, so the idea here is to select a top corner, because you're going to be selecting basically a cube, if you will. You're going to be doing 2 corners. Okay, so now you select another corner. I usually go down to bedrock and select it. So now your settings have been copied to the shape card, and you can place the shape card into the builder. And with that, you should be able to build. Oh, I don't have a chest. See, this is what happens if you don't have a chest. Okay, so with that, it mined out part of it. And the reason why I didn't mine out those 2 pieces is because of how I set it up. So with that in mind, now you know how to use a builder. Let's check out the mining dimension. Okay, so here I have previously set up a small little area, very small. Like this is only a few chunks wide. And you can see how much material I've already got out of this one area. Now, additionally, I also set up a little export of deep slate and cobblestone to get it out of here, because that was actually filling this up. There's a lot of it. I mean, look how deep that goes. Okay, so this is the same exact setup. I just changed the shape card to be a much larger. Now, the reason why you want clearing instead of something that's going to place is because down below, below the stone levels, you'll come across a lot of all the Modium ore. A lot of it. So in the deep slate layer, that's where you're going to get it. Now notice, something else is happening here. You have a lot of other materials, like a ton of gold, a ton of uraninite, a ton of copper, lapis. We got tin, emeralds, diamonds. You got nether rack. You got end stone. All of this is going to be needed. So getting a quarry set up in the mining dimension is definitely going to be something that you're going to want to make a priority. With the builder as your quarry, you can get a lot of resources. It is a little bit time consuming. There is another option. It's the chunk destroyer. The chunk destroyer is what it says it is. It literally destroys chunks. Now, if you have it set up correctly, you'll be able to actually harvest all the materials that it breaks. But basically, if it doesn't have a chest associated with it or somewhere to put the stuff, it's going to void it. So if you just have a simple, one size Minecraft chest on here, you'll get some materials, but what's going to happen is it's going to void everything else that it's destroying. It doesn't care and it doesn't mind what's above it. It's going to destroy the stuff, and if it has a place to put it, it will. Otherwise, it gets voided. So unless you have the means to put all of this into storage, I would recommend doing the builder instead of a chunk destroyer. So with the need for power, you're going to want some storage, and I highly recommend using Flux Networks. Now, the reason why I recommend Flux Networks is because it's wireless, and it allows for easy manipulation of chunk loading and builders or quarries. So first thing you're going to want to do is actually make yourself some of this flux dust. Okay, so in order to show this, I have to go into survival mode. So you'll take some redstone dust and find some bedrock and leave one airspace above the bedrock and place an obsidian. Toss your redstone dust in there and then left click. Okay, that will get you flux dust. With flux dust, you'll be able to start crafting yourself some of these flux cores with some obsidian and eyes of ender. You know, eyes of ender, not ender pearls. Okay, so you'll need some blaze powder. After you have some of those, you can start making flux blocks, which is just 4 flux cores and 5 flux dust. Because you'll need both of these, the flux core and the flux block, to start making these other units. So the first thing to make is a flux controller. This is what allows you to access your network. You'll notice that I have quite a few here. We'll get to that in a moment. You can set up a bunch of networks and, you know, change what networks have what power, so you can customize that. Especially if you're on a server, you can have lots of different networks available. Next thing, and probably one of the more important things, is you'll be making a lot of these flux points. These allow you to send power to machines or cables. Okay, the flux plugs allow you to receive power into the network. Okay, so you plug into the network and then you send points for receiving power elsewhere. Next, you'll want some flux storage, so that way you have a little bit of a backup. This isn't absolutely necessary. You can technically draw instantly from what you're receiving, but then you won't have any energy backup. So there's a lot of different varieties of these. Actually, I think there's like 3. You have the basic flux storage, which is holds 2 million, and then the Herculean holds 16, and the Gargantuan holds 128 million. These get rather expensive, right? Because this one requires 6 Herculean, and each Herculean requires 6 basic. So it gets exponentially larger. I recommend just starting with 1 basic flux storage. If you can afford it, maybe go a little bit higher, but there are some other options for you for energy storage that you can look up and utilize. Okay, so now that you have an idea of Flux Networks and how to handle wireless, something that I would recommend is getting some early game power setup. Now, there's a few options, and these aren't the only options. Keep that in mind. But some of the options are windmills. Okay, so one of the first things that you're going to want to do is make yourself a metallurgic infuser. Okay, so that takes some iron ingots, redstone, osmium, and some furnaces. And with that, you'll be able to make yourself infused alloy, basic control circuit. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is place some redstone in this slot here, which will give you some millibuckets of redstone, and then place an iron in there to get yourself an infused alloy. Same thing over here for the basic control circuit. It takes redstone, 20 millibuckets though, and osmium ingots. Okay. Once you have those, you'll be able to make yourself a energy tablet. It does not need to be charged for what you're about to do. Some gold ingots and some redstone. Okay, this will allow you to craft up some wind generators. Now these, they get better the higher they go. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you have height, it's going to be useful. So notice here that they're kind of producing a small amount. It's not really producing a ton. So here you can see that 3 of these is netting us 72 FE per tick. So and keep in mind here, I'm only at a really low Y level. Okay, if you have these higher and more of them, you'll get a lot more energy out. I believe if you're like near build height, it's actually closer to like 384 FE per tick per one of these. It's a fair amount, and they're really cheap to make. Our next option is going to be the gas burning generator. This is probably one of the most efficient early game and can be expanded later for some decent amount of power. So we have two different setups that we can go with. You can go with a crusher and the rest of the machines, or you can add in a precision sawmill. Now the reason why I bring that up is because in order to get the gas burning generator to work, you have to make ethylene. Ethylene is produced by combining hydrogen and another liquid. We'll be using water and biofuel. Okay, that will net you a substrate, which we can store for later use, or you can void it. But that makes ethylene. Ethylene gets pushed into the generator to make power. In order to make biofuel, what you're going to want to do is choose which method you want to use. There's a lot of options. Okay, now one of the best that I came across happens to be melons. Regardless of which way you end up choosing, melons is probably the best. Now, melons themselves, they give you 5 biofuel. Now, melon slices rather, give you 7. So if you choose melons, just melons, okay, you'll be able to get 5, and it'll work. Okay, so we get 5. It gets pushed into this pressurized reaction chamber. It produces substrate, and then this is producing power off of burning ethylene. Now you can see that simple process is producing a lot of FE per tick. See how much it's producing? I mean, that's really good for a simple setup. Doing melons is fine enough, but if you want to be a little bit more efficient on quantity of melons, which might not necessarily be necessary, unless you expand to having multiple gas burning generators, 1 melon nets you 5 of biofuels. Okay, but 1 melon also nets you, in the precision sawmill, it nets you 9 melon slices. Melon slices nets you 4 biofuel. So instead of getting 5 out of 1 block of melon, you can get 36 biofuel off of 1 melon by simply adding in a precision sawmill. This does consume a little bit of energy, but it produces a lot more pieces, and then you can expand having gas burning generators off of one of these setups. Okay, so with that now viable, see, that's input. Okay, why are you actually not? There we go. So now with that automatically working, this will start making biofuel with the slices. And this actually needs to have output down there. I have a storage container down here. You can have whatever you want for that, or you can void it. But with one of these, notice that it's producing the same amount of energy per, and it's just increasing. It's kind of crazy how much this is actually producing. It can get up to over 11,000 per tick. Okay, so this is actually a really, really efficient method to getting power, and you can expand it very well. Another option is bigger reactors. Now, bigger reactors is a little bit on the dicey side because I believe they can actually explode. I did not personally use this in my Let's Play. But this is actually a rather simple, bigger reactor. Okay, notice that I only have one control rod in there and no coolant inside. Okay, it's a 5 by 5 by 5. Okay, what you want to do is you want to add plutonium into an access port. Now, an access port can also be changed into an output. So that way, when you get waste, it'll output into that. So let's go ahead and turn this on. And this is producing a large amount as well. I mean, it's going up and up and up. Now this is going to get hot, and it's going to burn through a lot of material. Once it gets to 1,000 mil buckets of waste, you should see an export of waste. Okay, note here that it didn't actually do that, and it's still collecting waste. That's because you want to make sure that you have waste ejection enabled, so that way it will eject it. Okay, so with that, you now make a cyanite ingots out of your waste, and that can be reprocessed later on to make a turbine, which is even more energy. Now, something to keep in mind with these is if they get way too hot, they will explode. That is implemented as far as I'm aware. So you can use bigger reactors interaction with computer craft. Now, I did not set this up because that's not the route that I went, but you can do that to basically set it and forget it, if you will. As long as you have enough fuel to input and you have the means to contain the waste and maintain the temperature, you can actually produce a lot of energy at an extremely low cost. So between bigger reactors and Mekanism's gas burning generator, you have options galore for early power generation. That wrap up part 1 of the ATM Star Guide. If this helped you get started, or if you'd like something clarified, let me know down below, and I'll do my best to help. Once additional portions of this guide are uploaded, you'll find them here and in the playlist. In the next part, we'll begin with covering how to obtain vibranium, unobtainium, and additional parts to the ATM Star. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like on it and sharing with your friends. Drop a comment to let me know what you think. And as always, thanks for chilling.